Hi there, this is Linda and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about documenting travel in project life. Let's go ahead and dive right in. As you can see, I have a stack of project life albums here on my desk open, and I have so many more sitting on the edges. It's a little bit crazy. But what I wanted to do today was flip back through some of my older albums and talk about my travel spreads specifically. Some of these albums do have full flip throughs here on my channel, and some of them, the more recent ones, also have process videos. Some of the older ones are not on my channel at all, so these spreads you'll be seeing for the first time. I wanted to just go ahead and talk about specifically how I document travel in my project life, because I've gotten so many questions about it. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. Okay, so the first category I want to talk about are beach vacations. And I think of beach vacations a little bit different from other vacations because they're more just about relaxing. So there's not a ton of sightseeing. So here in 2016, I went to Florida, and I just have a few photos from that adventure. And so I just worked it into my regular weekly spread. We were not even gone for an entire week. So I actually have some work related things going on here when I came back, and my friend here who was watching Pumpkin, but just some photos and stuff from travel. And I just kind of worked it into my regular weekly spread as if it was just a part of my normal week. Okay, so the next one I wanted to document was another trip to Florida in 2019. And this one, we went for a little bit longer, and I did have a few more photos. So I decided to make it an entire spread. And I do Project Life weekly, which means I've modified my weeks to fit. And I started this in 2016, I believe. Maybe it's 2017 that I started kind of doing exactly this approach. So you can see here, this is the 25th through the 28th, which is not a full week, and that's okay. I decided to give this its own spread. You can see that I'm doing 12 by 12 Project Life at this time, so I made my 4 by 6 pockets all photos. I created some journaling cards using stamps and type journaling, and that was a way to include more text. And basically, I included some journaling about each day, and then the travel day just ended up here. And when I type my journaling like this, I'm able to get more words into a smaller space so I can include more photos, which is something I like to do pretty frequently with a travel spread. So here is another spread, again at the beach. This one is in Cape Cod. And what I decided to do here was, first of all, I added in some ephemera by just poking holes in it. This is not something I do anymore because when the album gets so thick, it tends to like mess it up. But I do really like how it looked. I loved this postcard. But I included some pocket pages and added a little insert here. But then I made a 12 by 12 layout. And this helped just kind of add more stuff in. I was able to blow up this photo of me and my daughter at the beach. And then on the back, I added some ephemera and a map. This is before I was doing journaling, so I didn't really have another place to put this stuff, and had the spread continue on here. So this way I was able to kind of do 2 full pocket pages, an insert, and a 12 by 12. After this one, I decided I didn't like the 12 by 12 insert because it almost kind of broke the spread up so that you would feel like this was a separate spread. If I was doing this today, I would make this 9 by 12 so that it's like sandwiched inside the spread, but it still works. And for this one, you can see I'm using products from my stash, which was a good way to use up a lot of travel products that you often have. I just pulled a bunch of different things, and because they're not from a specific kit, I tried to pick colors that went together. So I have some yellows, I have some teals, and then I pulled in the same ones on here in my 12 by 12 layout. Okay, here's another approach to a Cape Cod vacation. So sometimes I want to include a lot of words because there is usually a lot to say about travel, and other times I don't. And usually when I don't want to include a lot, it's because I have done a separate travel album And I did make a separate travel album that was Cape Cod through the years. And I think I probably made it around this time, which is why I felt like I didn't need to put more journaling in this spread. So instead, what I did was I used one journaling card to just make a bullet point list sort of the highlights, and then I could focus on the photos. To create this, I decided to make a large statement piece. And so I just used a font in Photoshop and masked my photos into the font. And that is a fairly simple thing to do. If you wanted to see how to do that, I would just Google or you look on YouTube for masking images. But essentially, you would just use the font as a shape and then mask your images onto it. And I thought it was a really fun way to make a very bold statement about the spread. Here's another beach trip to Cape Cod, this time in 2020. And so for this one, I decided to focus more on photos and having some filler cards, and then put all of my journaling on a large typed insert, on a 6x12 insert. You'll see that I do this in a couple of my travel spreads, but I really like this as a way to add more journaling. This is something I haven't done more recently because now I keep a daily journal, which has a lot of longer journaling. But usually, especially in the past, this was kind of my first place to write my reflections on the trip. And so I used to like to include that longer journaling. It also gave me an opportunity to add another large photo in here and a few more details of this trip. Here we're moving into 2023. At this point in time, I switched to the 9x12 album, which flipping back through these, I just like the 9x12 better. It's just such a more manageable size, although you have way more space in the 12x12. What I decided to do for this spread was include just one journaling card to recap that this was a week in the Dominican Republic, and then focus the rest of the time on photos. This was a very relaxing, all-inclusive resort trip. So I just kind of made some notes of a few of the things that I did. I added a couple of filler cards from my stash, and then I put photos. You can see here for my title, I also added a large title of where I went, just like the last one with the Cape Cod large. This is something you'll see me do in a lot of my travel spreads, where in addition to putting the dates on my title card or somewhere in the spread, I have the location really big, because even though when you flip to the spread, you can tell this is not my normal life in New York, especially in February. I like having a very quick highlight of like, hey, this is where I am during this spread. For my last beach vacation, I have this trip to St. Lucia. And for this one, I have a few more photos because there were just a few more activities. It was, again, an all-inclusive resort, but I have some hikes I went on and some snorkeling, and I just had more photos from this trip than some of the other ones that I wanted to include. Another thing that I keep in mind for beach vacations is I usually am not doing a separate travel album. So everything from that vacation is going to go in here or in my journal. So that gives me a little bit more of a pointer in terms of selecting my photos and what to include. For this one, I used one of the the quarterly scrapbook kits from Ali Edwards that are similar to the current storyteller kits. They were quarterly scrapbook kits. And this one I think was like punctuation or something like that. So I have all these like exclamation points. I have these large titles that I thought made really good kind of focal points. And then I added my large text of where we went here. And I just did one little journaling there and then a bullet point list of like highlights. For this one, I didn't put the title of where we went on here. And I think if I was doing this again, I would probably write that across there, because I don't love that you have to flip to the second page to see it. But other than that, I'm really happy with how this one came out. I also really like, you can see that I have like a color scheme. A lot of my photos have blue in them because it's the beach and pools and, everything's blue. So I pulled a lot of blue in my products and made that kind of my focal color, and everything else that I pulled in is a neutral pretty much. I have a couple pops of color of like reds here on some embellishments and then in my photos, but the majority of it is one set color scheme. Okay, so that wrapped up beach vacations. The second category I wanted to tackle were road trips. And I think of road trips a little bit differently because they're usually shorter, more contained, and flow into your ordinary life a little bit more. A lot of times my road trips also don't get their own standalone albums. So here we're going back to 2015, and this was a road trip I took in February to Buffalo and Niagara Falls. Why I chose to go in February, I don't know. And Toronto. It was very, very cold, but I did want to see Niagara Falls frozen, and I did get to do that. So for this one, you can see I'm just using my regular products. I was using a lot of Studio Calico at the time, so most of this is from Studio Calico. Obviously, my style has changed quite a bit since then. A lot of this typing was done on my typewriter at the time. I have a new typewriter now, which I like better. You can see like some of it is kind of messed up, but I did add a lot of typing that way. And that way you can add a little bit more text. And then in 2015, I did not do weekly or like set spreads. I just kind of did like a go with the flow where I just kind of added to it until I finished what I wanted to share. So for this spread, I did Buffalo, and then I moved to Niagara Falls, and I added in a little bit of a few inserts here. I created this insert to add in some of my ephemera. Like I said, I'm not making a separate travel album for this trip. I have a ticket here. During 2015, I was putting borders around all of my 4x6 photos. Or actually, all of my photos, I think, have borders. It was just what I was doing at the time. But I think it worked really well with all of these frozen Niagara Falls photos. And then the last spread is Toronto, which was the next destination. And I actually used a postcard that I picked up in Toronto as my title card. At this time, like I said, I'm not putting dates. So instead, I'm just adding this in and letting it just kind of flow as part of my ordinary life, which is a completely legitimate way to approach this project. The next road trip I have here is a road trip to visit cousins in Vermont, or my daughter's cousins. And so we went on like a weekend. So again, here you can see me adjusting my dates. I stamped out Vermont here, and then I stamped Burlington because that was one of the cities that we went to. We went to a few different places in Vermont, and I documented it here with just a little bit of journaling. And part of my approach with that was that I had intended to make a mini album. I have a little album in a little pouch of all of my ephemera and everything. I never made it. I don't think I will because this was a trip I took with my ex, and although there was a lot of stuff with my daughter that I probably would want to highlight, I don't really want to go back and document a trip with him at this point in time. I'm not getting rid of those albums, but actually actively documenting them is probably not something I want to do. So this is really the only way that this is documented, which is totally fine. In my mind, I'm thinking when I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to include travel in project life, or I guess when people ask if I want to include travel in project life, I do, because at the end of the year, I want this album to show everything that happened. And I don't want it to skip my trips, even though they might be documented elsewhere. And you might have a situation like this where you never get to the mini album, but then I get it, at least it's in project life. At least I have some of the photos highlighted and I have some of the memories included. I did add a little bit of ephemera in here. Most of it was saved for that mini album, but I'm happy that I pushed myself to use some because, like I said, that mini album is probably never going to get made. The products I'm using here are from the travel collection from Allie Edwards from this year. And I'm pretty sure I made a travel album with this collection. From looking at it, it looks like the year that I probably contributed to the travel class and put together my Cape Cod album. But I had enough products that I wanted to use it to document this trip in that separate album as well. Never did it. But using those same products here that I was going to use in that mini album just kind of helps me coordinate them with the trip itself. For this spread, again, I only have the one journaling card because I wanted to include more photos and more ephemera and more things. I did want to add a filler card over here to break up the photos so it's not like solid brick of photos, because to me that gets a little bit busy when you do that. But then like here, I have a photo on paper, and that kind of breaks up the giant block of photos as well. I did some repeated embellishment clusters across the spread to kind of tie it together, and the repeated stamping. And I'm really happy with how this one came out. Okay, here's again another road trip, this time to Washington, D.C. Again, this is one that I had wanted to document in a separate album and never did. I probably won't go back and do it because, again, I was with my ex. However, a lot of the photos were focused on me and my daughter, so I might still put it together at some point. We'll see. I have a backlog of travel albums, so who knows. For this one, again, I'm using products from a Ali Edwards travel collection with some of these pieces. However, I also was using some pattern papers and stuff from my stash. I don't think this was from that same travel collection. For my journaling, again, I did kind of what I had done in the past where I typed up journaling and just made my own journaling cards, because that way you can include way more words on one card and add a lot of photos. Most of the spread is photos because I had so many photos I wanted to include. I also added in the 6x8 insert so I could include some additional photos. This is one I recreated from 2011, so 10 years later. I also have one that I did when I went to Vegas, which is going to be one of the trips that I share later in this video, where I also recreated a photo. I don't think it was exactly 10 years later, but it's always fun when you can do that. Of course, this was in December versus that was in the summer, so my outfit is very different, but it's very fun when you can go back to the same place. And then here, of course, me on the steps of the Supreme Court. If you don't know, I'm a lawyer, so that was something I really wanted to do in RBG's grave. And also visiting the tax court because I'm a tax attorney. But I really focused on this one on like sightseeing pictures. And for this trip for DC, this is somewhere I used to live. I lived there for a summer in college. So I am very familiar with the city of DC. And a lot of times my familiarity with an area will dictate kind of how I document it. For this spread though, because I was going through a rough time personally, this is when I was getting ready to go through a divorce. Most of my photos are focused on sightseeing, and you can see like I kind of was going for like, I feel like there's like a calm feel to my photos and very like serene. Like obviously the Holocaust is very sad, but this is the Holocaust Museum and it's just like a somber kind of the Vietnam Memorial. And I also have this, we went to Gettysburg, and RGB's grave in Arlington. So it was a very kind of somber spread. And then even the ones that are not sad things, I have a reflection here. I have these big steps. So I kind of went for like a mood, and I didn't necessarily do that intentionally, but I feel like the mood of my photos kind of mirrored the mood of my life at the time. And I don't know. I'm really happy with how it came out. Of course, there's some more fun photos. You can also see the masks, which is just kind of reminiscent of it's 2021. So, we're not wearing them outside, but we did have to in certain businesses, and just something to kind of reflect on and see this piece of my story. One thing that is missing from the spread is I didn't put a big title of where we went. And I think one of the main reasons I did that is because, like I said, this is a place I used to live, an area I've been many times in my life. So it wasn't as like travel for me, but it is still, of course, a travel spread. Back to a more recent spread. So you can see them back in the 9x12 size. This is a road trip that me and my daughter took to Montreal after her high school graduation. And again, it's a road trip, so it's a little bit more contained. There's not that flight and so much travel. But, so we just went for the weekend, but I'm still giving it its own spread, even though it's not a full week. For this spread, I decided to use these tags that were from an Ali Edwards kit and use that as a repeated journaling. You'll see through a lot of these spreads that one way I'd like to do my journaling for travel spreads and Project Life is to have one card per day. For this one, I just did kind of like a bullet point list of what we did. And I actually had 2 days on here because it was just the driving home day. I didn't have longer journaling or reflection here. And I think that's because in 2023, I was already using a daily journal. So I did have more journaling there. And instead, I decided to just focus on a few highlights and bullet point list and enjoy the photos from the trip. Maybe I should have done some longer journaling. At the time, I'm not sure if I was thinking about doing a mini album. I'm not sure. I've been to Montreal quite a few times because it is road trip distance from where I live. I didn't pull up any of the other Montreal trips for this video, but there are some other ones in my Project Life albums. And sometimes they're usually about a weekend trip because it's only a few hours away. But maybe I will make an album about it at some point because this was my daughter's like high school graduation celebration. And, you know, she was the drinking age there, so it was kind of fun. We got ice cream, focusing on kind of picking photos that told the story of what happened and like the things that I really like. So I have some ice cream and coffee. Obviously, we did sightseeing and stuff, but I focused more on like, this is what I wanted to remember. Going to a craft store, photos of us together, and just having fun. Here's another weekend road trip, this time to Lake Placid, New York. Rather than journaling or like creating a title, I used a photo of the sign from Lake Placid to be my title so that you knew where I went for the weekend. For this one, I used one of the story kits, and I think this is probably like good or enjoy. I can't remember what it was, but it was one of the story kits and I think it is enjoy because I see that word a few places here. So I used that as a jumping off point to tell the story. For this spread, I think I actually included this as part of a full week. So this photo of pumpkin and this photo of my lunch or dinner here were not related to the trip, but everything else was. And I feel like that is a way that you can work a trip, especially like a weekend road trip, into your project life, is just let it take over your spread. The rest of that week, there's just a few little minor things that happened. I just made a bullet point list and included a couple of photos, and that's it. Let the trip kind of take over. However, like I said, this was just a weekend getaway. I was visiting a friend. There's not really a lot of sightseeing. I think I did a couple of things in Lake Placid. I've been there a few times now. Then I have photos of like my coffee, and my friend's new kitten, who is not that little anymore. And it was just fun to include just a few of the highlights from the trip. Again, just another small little road trip that's obviously not going to get its own album, but it's fun to include it in my project life. For this one, again, I did another road trip to Niagara Falls and Toronto. This time I didn't really do anything in Buffalo, so I didn't include that, but Buffalo is right by Niagara Falls, and I think I stayed the night there. So for this side, I just did some photos from Niagara Falls, and this side were some photos from Toronto. This was a super quick trip tacked onto a work trip. I just did a little bit like a flip up to do my journaling so that I could have a lot of journaling, and also I think, so I could keep some of it private, just because part of it was related to work. Everything is still secret. I don't share anything about work, even in my private journaling, but still. And then here was about Saturday walking around Toronto. I captured kind of what I wanted to capture. So yes, I saw the CN Tower. I've been up that the previous time I went. So this was more just like, what was I wanting to capture? So the coffee place, my food, craft store, I got some stamps, and because the Traveler's Caravan was there. What frustrates me so much though is, if you guys have been following me for a while, you know I go to all the Travelers Company partner shops and get their Travelers Partner stamp. I didn't get the one from Paper Plus Cloth in Toronto when I was there, so I need to go back again. It's not that far. I will probably take a road trip there at some point, but it's frustrating that I didn't get it when I was there because I totally forgot, because the stamp caravan was there and I was focused on getting those stamps. So here I'm using, I think, some Cocoa Daisy products in here. Yeah, I think that this was one of my Cocoa Daisy spreads. So it's completely all Cocoa Daisy products. And it's just a fun kit that was kind of related to road trips. So it was perfect for this spread and just another fun one to include in my project life. And for my last road trip, again to upstate New York, to the Adirondacks, again by Lake Placid. This time I stayed in Saranac Lake. That's where my friend lives. So I was visiting her. She was pregnant. So it was just photos of us hanging out. We went to the farmer's market, got coffee, went to some craft stores, went for a hike. And then we celebrated Pumpkin's birthday when we got home. So I just added that in because it was part of that same weekend. And, I had space for it. I could have taken that photo and moved it to the next week and just messed with the dates a little bit more because, like I said, I mess with the dates. But I decided to just leave it. For this one, I'm using Stash products, which is a great way to use up a lot of things for travel because I had a lot of things like this lake life and I ate this. So I was trying to use these products, that the farmer's market one that had been sitting in my stash forever. Oh, and the making lemonade one because we made lemonade. This was a very big stash busting spread. And I had so much fun taking all these very specific elements from my stash and making them fit this trip. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the third category of trips, and these are what I classify as big trips. So usually these require flights, they are longer durations, and typically I make a separate travel album for them. Not always, but I usually want to. So sometimes I have done this where, and you'll see in the more recent ones, I make full spreads that are recapping the trip. Back in 2015, and this is an approach I took, which you could definitely do, where I just did a very brief recap. So I went to London, Paris, Normandy. And what I did was I just created this insert that just says, hey, I did this trip. And here's just a few highlights. Some of the photos. I put some ephemera and embellishments in here and filled it on the back as well. Just some photos from the trip. So I did create a whole separate album documenting this vacation. And I just didn't want to, at the time I was I don't really want to duplicate it, but I also didn't want to ignore it in here. So this is a good way where you can, if you don't want to duplicate that and you're making a separate album, just create an insert to kind of do a few of the highlights. This didn't really take that long and it just fits in between some of my other spreads. In 2015, this is when I was doing kind of that go with the flow approach. So I didn't have weekly spreads where it wasn't going to be its own spread or in the middle of another week. But you could definitely make this work however you lay out your albums. Here is another one. This is a trip to Memphis, and I created a mini album for this trip. It's a small little 4x4 mini album because again, it was just a weekend, but it was a long weekend and I had to fly. I was really there for a wedding. So how I broke this up was I had a day here with some sightseeing. Then I had stuff from the wedding. That was also my birthday. So I had a page about that and about turning 29, which really isn't related to the trip, but my birthday was during the trip. And then here is how I finished out that spread with the rest of the sightseeing. And I included some ephemera in here. Other ephemera ended up in my album. What I did was I usually do project life first. So I will kind of pick and choose what I want to save for the album and what I want to include in here. And I definitely did a mixture. Again, because this is 2015, I am not doing set weekly spread. So I'm able to just kind of fit it in with the rest of the spread, with the rest of the pages. So other non-travel related things, it just kind of flows from it. And here's from the rehearsal dinner. So just adding it in to the rest of my album. For the next trip, I am documenting a trip to Vegas. This one I never made a separate album for. I guess I just didn't really think about it. But I'm just using a variety of products. What I did do for this one, which I thought was a little interesting, was for the spread, I just have mostly photos and ephemera. And here, I have a cash out voucher. Rather than getting my 39 cents, I kept it so I could have the ephemera. And instead of just doing that, I wanted to include some more photos, but I created a large typed journaling of the entire trip. So like this was my full recap of the trip rather than putting it in the spread. And that way I was able to add so many more words. I also made some traditional layouts to include here, including this highlights. And here's where I have that recreated photo from 2009 to 2016. So it wasn't a full 10 years, but again, it was kind of fun to do that and include some more photos in a traditional layout, just sandwiched in my spread. Again, here's one where I switched the dates so that it wasn't a full week. I also added a title for where I went. And this trip, I was also visiting my parents. They don't live in Vegas, but they met me there. So there are some photos and journaling about that as well. Here is another trip, and this was actually a work trip that I went on to Chicago, but I'd also never been to Chicago, and I fit in some sightseeing. So obviously the majority of my spread focuses on the sightseeing. I added in some flip ups, and that way I was able to type and get more journaling in and a few more photos. Because I don't love how it looks when you have just a solid block of photos, I added this extra photo under a filler card. And then I added some white cardstock behind some of these things just to break it up a little bit. On this side, I added in a longer journaling card so I could add a few more things. And then I added in some ephemera. And part of this is about like the actual work stuff that I had going on, but it's still a travel spread and I still like to include it in my album. Again, I adjusted the dates so that it would be its own spread. And I think these products are probably Studio Calico, but it's so old I can't tell. Okay, so this next spread, this is one that I never really planned to do a mini album, but I feel like I probably should. And this was a girls' trip for a bachelorette party for one of my best friends. And we went to Breckenridge. So here I am adding that title onto my title card, adjusting my dates to fit the trip. And what I did for this one was a combination of traditional layouts and pocket pages. I just had so much to include. And I think at the time I had decided I wasn't doing a mini album. So I was adding all my ephemera in here as well. I did a lot of typed journaling for this one so that I could detail every single day without taking up too much space. Adding in some traditional layouts with some of the photos we took and documenting my friendship with my friend Teresa, who is the bride. Adding in some ephemera here. And then for the days, what I did was I created these journaling cards where I stamped the date. So this was August 31st in gray. And then I typed on vellum on top of it. And that was everything that happened that day. And I think those were probably photos from that day. And then the first and the second, which were the other 2 full days I had there, with some photos from those days. And then here was the heading home journaling and the heading there journaling. So I liked that I was able to add so many words into the spread by typing them smaller and then adding a lot of inserts so I could document everything I wanted to include. Obviously, if I had this many photos every single week, I would not be able to fit my project life in 2 albums a year. So I have to keep that in mind. But for something like this where there's so many photos and so many memories that I wanted to document, and I didn't want to make a separate album, including it like this made a lot of sense. Okay, so now I'm back into 2024, so back in the 9x12 albums. And this was a big trip to Europe. So what I did for this trip was kind of what I've been doing for most of my larger trips now, where I'm traveling internationally mostly, where each destination gets its own spread, even though it's all in one trip. And I feel like if you wanted to put the whole trip in one spread, like I did like in my 2015 album, where I went to the UK and France and I put it all in one spread in one like highlights, you could definitely do that, especially if you're doing a separate album. I do plan to do a separate album for this. I have the products picked out. I have the album sketched out. I just have not yet made it. This was in 2024 and I will make it at some point, but this I actually made in 2024, and getting this documented is going to be a reference for me when I make my actual album. And even if I don't get to the album, I can still look back on these memories. So for this one, I used the Ali Edwards travel collection, but I used the digital version and some products from my stash to add a little bit of dimension. But I had a lot of fun with that. Again, I'm doing a lot of typed journaling so that I can fit more words and really recap what we did here. And then I'm adding in a filler card just to break up all of the photos. Next, we did Prague and Vienna, and I decided to not give them each their own spread because there wasn't as much to document for Vienna, and I didn't want my album to get too thick. So what I did instead was gave them like 1.5 spreads, or I guess 3/4 of a spread. So they have their own side. So this is Prague here, and then it has an insert, and then Vienna is on this side. For this one, I used the Senses story kit, and I used these kind of like sense cards to recap Prague. And using that as a specific lens is a really fun way to recap travel, especially when you have so much to say and you don't really know how to focus. Using a directed storytelling kit is a great way to kind of pick your focus. I had a hard time narrowing down my photos, but knowing that I'm doing a separate album makes it so much easier because then I try to pick photos that were like the highlights and the overview of the trip. So I have obviously some of the biggest sites that we saw, made sure to get me in at least one of the photos, and then our favorite sandwich that we had, which was so good. Vienna was what the trip was planned around. I met up with some friends and we were supposed to go see Taylor Swift, but we did not see Taylor Swift because Taylor Swift got canceled. And so I documented that. Of course, that was kind of a big piece of what happened there. And then still meeting up with the friends, and then some sightseeing that we did in Vienna. Because these two were in the same spread, on this side, I did the large Prague here, and then the large Vienna here. I feel like this probably could have been bigger because when you first look at it, it doesn't pop out as much as like some of these other things. But using like this prompt from a story kit, from the Census story kit, was perfect for this story. And I feel like this card was what made me choose the Census story kit to use for this spread. Even though I only use the story cards on this side, using the same kit throughout the entire spread really helped kind of tie them together. I use the same paper here. I use these gold words, and a lot of the colors just kind of flow across the spread. Next, we went to Budapest, which was probably my favorite stop on this trip. And for this one, I used a scrapbook 12 by 12 pad that I purchased. Pretty sure it's this one from Vicky Boutin. And yeah, I just got this on scrapbook.com and used that as a jumping off point for the papers. And then I added in a few things from my stash to help kind of bring the spread together. For this one, again, I kind of have a blue color scheme because there's blue in most of my photos with the sky or the water in a few of them. And so I really picked up on that with the colors and balanced it with a little bit of yellow. And there were some journaling cards in that paper pad because it was like some cut apart sheets. So I used that. And then of course I brought in some pieces like chipboard and stuff from my stash, which is a great way to stash bust. Then finally, our last stop was Istanbul. And for this one, I used an older Studio Calico kit that I was trying to crush. And there were so many things. This one was like the longest stop and there was so much to do. So what I decided to do for this one was I pulled these numbers and used them to highlight some of my photos, and then added on some journaling card, some numbered items, and just kind of identified them because that way I'll know what these are in the future. Some of them I think I could probably identify. I can identify them now. At some point I won't remember the name of this tower. So being able to see it here, I think is super helpful and a good way to kind of tie it all together without taking up a ton of space by having a different journaling card for each photo. I also included these two cards for our routine, just generally kind of talking about our travel, like mornings and evenings, which I thought was a fun way to kind of recap overall. I didn't really add Istanbul as a big title in the front. Instead, I used this photo that has Istanbul, but it doesn't pop as much as I would have liked. And then I added it here as well so that you knew that both spreads kind of went to that trip. The next one I'm documenting is when we went to the Middle East. So we went to Doha, Qatar. So for this one, I used the Fun Storyteller Kit to highlight it. And I found these 4x6 cards that were in that kit and used 5 of them to hold photos and 1 to hold my typed journaling. Again, adding all of my journaling on one card, which makes it super easy to get a lot of words in one spot when you type it. And that way I had more pockets to fill with photos. Using these frames around my horizontal photos broke up the spread a bit more so that this page has a photo in every pocket except this one. And if those were not in these frames, I feel like it would be too much photo. So I think that really helps you get more photos into a spread. Something that I haven't seen in a lot of my spreads or haven't really talked about is you can also add multiple photos into one, especially if you use something like Photoshop to create a layered template. Next, we went to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And again, just like I did in the last one that I talked about with Prague and Vienna, I merged both of these into one spread without really breaking them up, but instead I added in a insert so that I could add a few additional photos. So we actually did Dubai. We stayed in Dubai and just took a day trip to Abu Dhabi. So how I did this is this photo is from Abu Dhabi, but these are all Dubai, and this is all Dubai, and this is Abu Dhabi, and kind of just broke it up like that. I'm using some products from my stash. I think a lot of these were from Geraldine C. They might have been some of her digitals actually that I printed. I can't remember, or a collection she did for another manufacturer. But she makes a ton of really great travel stuff. So it was really nice to be able to use it. These large arrows had been in my stash for a very long time. So I was super excited to be able to use them up. I really liked the idea of using them for my title card and to add my large words, using some super old thickers that I was using up, and then to frame this photo. I just liked how the arrows all kind of pointed like it was travel, and I don't know, I just was super happy with how this one came together. Again, using the similar color schemes, I have the teal and the yellow, and then the gold kind of plays off on that. And I feel like gold really goes with where we went. There's a lot of gold and like metals in their decor. So I feel like it just worked really well for this spread. We had another long trip in this same album. This time we went to the West Coast of the United States and again had a few different destinations. I'm using specific kits for each spread. I broke it up again where each destination is its own spread, and this, as you'll see, is kind of my approach going forward and what I feel works best for me. But in this video, I wanted to show you some of my older ones as well, so you could see some different approaches. This time we went to Seattle. So again, adding my large title of where we went, I added it on top of a photo I took of Seattle, which I thought allowed me to get an additional photo in rather than using up a card for just that title. For this one, I used the Seek Story Kit, which was one that was kind of sitting in my stash and I thought was really great for travel. So I had a lot of fun with that. It had this part 1, part 2, part 3 card. I think it was one of the 3x8 cards from the year that kit came out. There were 3x8 cards. So I cut them out and used those to create a bullet point list of what we did each day. And then I also added in this 1 and 2 of kind of an overview of what we did, where I wanted to add a few more details. And then I added in another card here to recap my favorite coffee shop that we found, which is something I absolutely love when we travel. Next, we went to Portland. I did not write a large Portland on here because I had this card that was from Coco Daisy that had PDX on it, which was just so perfect. I needed to use it. But we went to a few places outside of Portland. So like these are outside of Portland. This is in Portland here, and then this is out. So we did a few like little day trips from there. So instead I just labeled it Oregon, which I think worked really well. Then we went to San Francisco, and again, adding my large title here. This one, again, I'm crushing an older story kit. I used the whole story kit, and I thought that it worked really well with this spread. Okay, so our last stop was to a few different places in California. We went to see Yosemite and Sequoia National Park, and then visited my parents who live really close to there. So what I decided to do is use one of the storyteller kits to document this spread. And again, I added it in one spread with an insert. For this one, I had these 4x6 cards, which I believe were a cut apart from one of the 12x12 papers. And I just stamped a title on each one and did some journaling. I added a photo from Visalia and the coffee shop and my parents' pet tortoise. So a few things from that, but the rest of them, like this was all from Yosemite and this was from Sequoia National Park. So it all kind of flowed together. I used a national park sticker that I had in my stash. And then I had these old photos of my grandma, and I was recreating them in Sequoia Park almost 80 years later, which I thought was super cool. And so I wanted to include that. You can see I like to recreate old photos, but these ones were from the 1940s, so I did them now. So yeah, it's been 80 years, which is so crazy. And here's our most recent vacation. So we went to a few different destinations. Again, you can see I do a spread per destination. Sometimes I split a spread into 2 destinations if they were shorter spots. This first one was Barcelona. I used the most recent travel collection from 2025 from Ali Edwards to document this. I also had this page protector that flips out. This is a newer to me style from scrapbook.com, and it gave me the ability to add a few more photos in. I have so many photos I wanted to include. I just added my journaling on here with just a few quick highlights. This is another trip that I'm planning on doing a separate album for, and I haven't done it yet. So I didn't feel the need to put so many words in here. I also have them in my daily journal to refer back to when I work on my album. So the need to get it down like as soon as possible in here is not as pressing anymore because I am journaling while I'm traveling, and I started that probably in like 2024. So I don't necessarily need to write it all down in Project Life immediately to remember it. Next, we went to Marrakesh in Morocco, adding in my title, my dates, and I have, for this one, I used the history story kit, which I thought was really nice because there was a lot of history to see there, and it was also the week of my birthday, or not really week, but a few days. I spent my birthday there, so there was a Dear Future Me card, which I thought would be really nice to document my birthday. Next was a spread where I split 2 destinations. We went to Ait Ben Haddou and Casablanca. For this one, I used some products in my stash. I think this was from like the Stories by the Year collection from Ali Edwards, which came out a few years ago, and a newer stamp set to add my titles. And that kind of tied the 2 spreads together, but I was able to have the 2 different destinations each had their own page because they were each just one day. And then again, 2 different destinations. We have Madrid and Segovia. I added my titles using some smaller alpha stickers. For this one, I again used the travel collection from Ali Edwards. I decided to create my own title cards to add some typed journaling, and that way I was able to fill in all of the days. Because we had so much more, I had more photos that I really liked from Segovia, I just added all of the journaling on this side for Madrid, and then this is Segovia, and then our travel day home. And then I had some of my photos. I was sick, so one of my photos is of the cough syrup that I bought, which I think was kind of more capturing what really happened and what the trip looked like, in addition to some of my favorite photos from the trip. So that's a look at how I have documented a lot of my travels throughout the past few years or decade in Project Life. That was not all of my trips, but most of them, and I hope that it gave you a good idea of how to include travel in your Project Life album. Do you include travel in your Project Life album? Are you going to start doing so now? Let me know in the comments what you do or what you think. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And as always, I hope to see you guys all in the next one. Bye.